Heroic Fatherhood, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon edition of Dad's Making a Difference series. Over on my camera left is Mr. Roberto Santiago of an Interdisciplinary Life, and I got that out in without screwing it up. Again, this is an ongoing series of interviewing dad bloggers about their choice to share their story in the world and talk about the difference that it's made for themselves, the kind of response they've gotten, and why and what got them into deciding that they wanted to share their story. Hey, Roberto.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going great. What pray tell sweatshirt are you wearing?
I've watched some of your interviews, and I think I get the impression most people just get up in the morning and get dressed or whatever. I'm the kind of person who agonizes over like what I'm going to wear for stuff like this.
Yeah.
But since we talked yesterday and we were talking a lot about the lead up to Dad 2.0, I decided to wear my my Dad 2.0 t-shirt from last year.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roberto Santiago representing for the Dad 2.0 conference. Well done, sir. Well done. Excellent. Yeah, no, we had such a great time talking yesterday. We kind of had to kick each other off the phone. And I'm super psyched to have him on the phone. If you were going to look out your window, let's start there. What lovely city are we speaking to you from?
We are from somewhat chilly and yet still beautiful Berkeley, California.
Oh, that's so excellent. And I trust the weather is nicer there than it is here. Well done, sir.
Almost year round, yeah.
Almost year round.
Almost year round. I think you guys have a couple of nice days, and if those don't match up with our nice days, then you win for a couple days. But for the most part, I think we're good.
We're like that. We're like, that's our one day for fist in the air. We beat Berkeley.
That's right. That's okay, though, because I know you guys. You wear shorts when it's like 38 degrees. You're like, oh, my God, it's so nice. Oh, love it.
Exactly. Well, Roberto, you start us off. Tell us about your family. That's where I like to start. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Sure. I have 3 kids. I have my oldest is my son, Ryu. And then I've got 2 daughters. One is 6. One is 2. Ellie and Yo. And, they're a big part of my life, obviously. They're fantastically, I think precocious is probably the word. They know everything and they want you to know it.
Absolutely. Did you know? And let me tell you a little bit about yourself.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so great. Well, now here's the thing: is you've been blogging for a long time. When did you start blogging? It was right after this.
It was 2003.
Okay.
I started blogging as a way to avoid doing my master's research. There's my wife with a comment. So I started blogging because I needed a distraction from doing what I was supposed to do, which was my thesis. And I figured if I was writing something, I was still practicing writing, right? And for me, at least at that time, the whole idea of blogging was new. And so it was kind of a cool thing to get into, to do this self-publishing and to put thoughts out there.
Oh, very cool. And so you started getting out, but that's not new for you, right? The publishing piece was not a brand new conversation for you.
No, actually. So my mother was a freelance journalist, and that actually, watching her be a writer on her own and the whole freelance aspect of it really informed a lot of my worldview and the decisions I've made in my life and my career going forward. But through her influence and sometimes through her connections, I had been writing and publishing here and there, I don't know, at least since high school. Little things in magazines and small newspapers and stuff like that.
Were you the one who was in charge of like the school newspaper? And
I was cleaning out.
You had the pencil behind the ear and you were like, that's a deadline. We have to find out about what's at the cafeteria.
That's right. I was like the 6-year-old with like the fedora that said Scoop on it. No, actually. So I actually came across recently, digging through old boxes, issue of the first newspaper I ever worked on, which was in 4th grade at Longfellow Elementary School. and it was mimeographed. It was like that purple, like blotchy mimeograph. Yeah. And I was looking through all the people who worked on that newspaper and taking pictures of their articles and posting them on Facebook. And there were people who we thought we met in high school, but we worked on this newspaper together.
Oh, that's so great.
And what I remember most about that experience was that there was an advice column, anonymous advice column called Madame Tigre. We were the Tigers. And I so badly wanted to be Madame Tigre. And I thought, like, it's anonymous, so it doesn't matter if Madame Tigre is a man or a woman, you know. And I put in my bid to be Madame Tigre, and I wasn't selected, and I was crushed. It was like my first like crushing disappointment in the newspaper industry. So yeah, and then I worked on our newspaper in 8th grade, and I worked on our newspaper in high school. Although with coming from sort of this family of artists and writers and other people into those sort of artistic pursuits, I kind of swore that I wasn't going to do it. And so blogging was sort of a cool cheat for me, because I didn't have to pursue a career as a writer per se, but I could still write.
Got it. So you're sort of backdooring the writing thing.
Exactly. And then I didn't have to admit that I was just going to turn into my mother.
Well, if I remember correctly, she was quite an influential person in your life, my friend. Not just your mom, but like she didn't mess around. She was she was pretty active and took you places and stuff, didn't she?
Yeah. So for most of my life, or for most of my childhood, she was a single parent. So it was just me and her. That was it. And so like, I remember I was 5-6 years old when she sort of came to dinner one night and declared that she was going to leave her job at the East Bay Municipal Utility District, where she was doing press releases and stuff like that. And she was going to become a journalist, freelance journalist. And she started doing that, and just watching her move through her career, going from, writing articles for the East Bay Express, which is one of our free publications here, for whatever it was, 2 cents a word or something, all the way up through eventually writing for the Smithsonian and stuff like that, was just so cool. But she was also, she was mostly an arts and entertainment writer, and a single parent. So if she was going to cover some weird performance art show, because remember, this was the 80s and the Bay Area was full of weird performance art. If she was going to cover something, 9 times out of 10, she didn't have a babysitter, and it was easier to just bring me along. So I went to all kinds of weird theater, and also really cool, good theater, but a lot of weird stuff, and concerts and art exhibitions and gallery openings, and just you name it. I ended up going to all this stuff as a kid. And then one of the big things is that when I was 9, it was right after 4th grade, she decided that we were going to move to Europe for a year and just kind of vagabond around. It was something she'd always wanted to do. And she said, well, I wanted to wait till you were old enough for you to appreciate it, and I think that this is the time. So the summer after 4th grade, we drove to New York cross country, which was an awesome experience. And then we bummed around Europe until, I think a little bit after New Year's. So not quite a full year. And I was sort of in and out. I went to 2 schools for a couple months each, but mostly I just learned from traveling around.
Such bold choices, right? Like, talk about having been steeped in a childhood full of big decisions, bold choices. God, it's like that like for me, that like totally gets my skin tingling. The idea of like, come on, let's just go to Europe for a year. Like, I'm giving up my job, I'm going to go writing, and I'm going to drag you to everything. Maybe not the Mapplethorpe show, but all the rest of them you're coming to.
Yeah. And then at about the age of 50, she decided that she wasn't getting out of writing what she wanted, and she wanted to be outside more. So she went to community college and learned how to become a landscape designer, and launched a landscape designing business. And she was redoing city parks and people's gardens, and she just totally took this other path. And so that's one of the legacies of my mom, and one of the things that's informed a lot of my own parenting is this idea that like, you can just do stuff. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then that sounds like what a lovely segue. Roberto, well done, sir. So let's talk about the decision that you made. You made a decision to stay at home with your kids when your son was born.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. So it was a couple years after my middle daughter was born. And I was saying this when we talked the other day. I don't know how many 6-year-old kids like sit there and say like, I want to be a stay-at-home dad when I grow up. But that was me. Like, and again, like we're talking the 80s. So like minivans were new. I was like, I want a minivan. I want to have some kids. I just want to roll around with my kids doing stuff. And so during college, I worked as like a camp counselor. And when people said like, well, if you could do anything, money wasn't an issue, what would you do? And I was like, I would just be a camp counselor, right? You just run around in the woods teaching kids how to do stuff. Like, what's better than that? And so being a stay-at-home dad's a little bit like being camp counselor full-time. So when my son was born, I was working full-time at a company here in the Bay Area. And my wife was working as a freelancer. And then I had an opportunity to go back to school to do a PhD. And in the spirit of we will figure it out, it's a cool opportunity that my wife and I have sort of made one of the foundations of our marriage. We picked up and we moved to Washington, D.C. Without a whole lot of, it's not that we didn't put any thought to it, but it wasn't a tough decision. It was like, oh, this is cool. Let's go do that. So we did. And I spent 2.5 years doing my coursework. And at the end of that, we realized that all the money I was making, so I was doing my program and I was working part-time. And we realized all the money I was earning was just going towards paying for our house that we had kept in Berkeley. We were renting it, but it wasn't enough. So I had to make some on the back end so we could pay the mortgage.
Sure.
And we realized that if all my money was going just towards that house, if we sold the house, I wouldn't have to work. And if I didn't have to work, I could stay home and live the dream. And so that's what we did. We sold our house probably a year too early, but we sold our house and I stayed home with my kids, and I got to do that for a year before either of them went to school. And then for a couple of years after, through when my youngest was about 1.
Yeah. There's this, what I noticed in your story, and it shows up both in the way that you were raised as well as the decisions that you and your wife make. By the way, I'm pretty sure she's the one that just posted, "What a catch, is this guy married?"
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah, that would be her right there.
Yeah.
We're going to post that right on the screen for everybody to see. I assume, is it Tensa? Tanisa, forgive me, Tanisa. Well, there you have it. Either that or you have an admirer that just happens to have the same last name as you do. But what I notice is that there's in the thread in all of your stories is this faith, right? Like that you're going to make bold choices, whether it's your mom's choice to quit being, writing press releases to become a freelance writer, or her decision then to go and become a landscape architect, or the choice to get your master's or PhD, or your choice to sell a house in what is always an up market and almost never a down market. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think I know for myself, and I think for most dads and most men, the idea, it sounds risky, right? It sounds like, I don't know how this is going to work out. Like what's going to happen? Nobody knows. And it might go really badly.
Yeah. it is a risk. It's always a risk, and it might go badly. But I think that there's sort of two things. One is that it starts with faith in yourself, right? Like, who you are, what your skills are, what you're able to do. And as you look back on your life, all the things that you overcome and all the challenges you faced to get where you are. Yeah. So that's the first thing, is you have to really be able to look at yourself and think like, can I make this work? And then you have faith in your partner, and your partner has faith in you. And none of this works. Like if you're married, none of this works unless your spouse is on board, because it's hard. And that's the thing is there's this idea of having faith and being able to do something. You also have to recognize that, yeah, it's going to be hard. Like none of this happens and then you maintain the exact same life that you had before. You know, if you're thinking about leaving your steady job to be an entrepreneur, or you're going to leave your job in academia to be a freelance academic, there's risk involved.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to make sacrifices. And sometimes they're little things like giving up cable. And sometimes they're big things like moving into a house with one less bedroom. And then moving into a house with even one less bedroom, you know. And yeah, so you're gonna have to move from the fancy craft beers to the Kirkland brand craft beers, right? And I make light of it, but the point is that you have to be willing to give things up and know that you're doing it in order to get to a place that is going to be, in the end, hopefully at the very least, more satisfying.
Yeah. There's this piece for me about like being willing to go jump into the unknown anyways. Like, I don't know how this is going to work out, but jump in anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And just trust that you'll figure it out. Like everything else, like, you know, if you're a dad and you're watching this and if your child is more than, let's say, a day old, there have been a lot of days where you had no idea how it was going to go or at all how you're going to figure it out, but you do. Mm-hmm. And maybe it wasn't always pretty, but you always do.
Exactly.
And it's always it's not the day by day measurement that I succeed, but it's the culmination. You know, if you talk about like, you know, diet and exercise, people are like, I can't get onto this eating program and eat this way every day. And I'm like, well, you don't have to, but you do have to. Like, if you can just do it 80% of the time, that's probably a dramatic improvement over the way that you've been doing it. Absolutely. You don't have to show up every day. And yet people get so, my experience is that people take themselves out when they're like, oh, I totally ransacked the refrigerator for food last night. I must be a failure at eating well and exercising. It's like, no, you just had a bad day. Can you forgive, you know, like, can we like jump into it anyways and then jump back in when it doesn't go the way you were hoping?
Yeah. And one of the things you said there, like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out is like the motto of our marriage. Like, so many times when our plans have gone awry and things have not gone the way we've wanted, or conversely, when we've said, hey, there's an opportunity, should we jump at it? What are all the factors involved? And we just kind of look at each other and we go, we'll figure it out. And we always do. Which is, you know, again, it's what up, Mike? It's a testament to that faith in each other and being on board with each other. Yeah,
exactly. And the feeling never goes away when you take on the new thing. Like right now we're looking at colleges for my daughter. That's a whole new thing. And it's very uncomfortable. And there's lots of conversations and there's lots of things we don't know. And some of it we can do some research and find out. And some we just won't know until things start working themselves out. But the discomfort isn't any less, but it is familiar. Like, oh yeah, I'm just in that place where I don't know how this is going to go.
Well, let me tell all the dads out there that from opposite ends of the experience, my wife and I can both tell you it's okay to go to state school. You'll still be a success. Don't get too hung up on that.
Absolutely. Right. I remember we went to a talk about going to colleges, and this woman got up and she was like, great. She's like, here's what you have to understand is that 90% of the kids who are represented by their parents in this room are not going to get into the only 17 colleges that you can even name. And yet there are still over 2,000 universities in this country. So you may want to open up your awareness of other places that your child may go to school.
Absolutely. Especially if you wanted like major in something like theater, like, you know, don't spend too much money doing that. That's all I'm going to say.
So this seems like a fantastic segue. Because now to the title of your blog, which is an interdisciplinary life. Can you share with the viewers a little bit like what you shared with me about how you came about the name?
Sure. I mean, the first thing was I didn't want to be too popular. So to find my blog, you have to be able to spell interdisciplinary. So that helps weed out all the people who might enjoy.
Oh, now I'm freaking out because I have to put it up on the dang screen.
No, actually, I was told. I sat down with like a branding person at one of the Dad 2.0s, and she was like, "This name, man, I don't know." And I get that.
That I could have just screwed it up. And interdisciplinary.com.
I think you got it.
Okay.
But
sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No problem. But the way I came to it, so it's again sort of like as I've talked about, like with my mom and my life growing up and my life with my wife. My academic career has always been very interdisciplinary. So I keep like publishing these research studies in different fields. And one of my very wonderful, trusted mentors at my university where I was studying said, she had two pieces of advice. One was, whatever you do your dissertation on, you better love it because you're going to be like that guy. That's what you're going to be known for in our field, like forever. Two, pick a focus, man. Like, it's going to be a lot easier to get a job if people know that you are this person and you fill this role in their department. And her advice to me was to stop being so spread out. But I find that not just my academic career, but my life is very interdisciplinary because what I learned from my mom is that the whole point of living is to collect as many cool experiences as possible, to do as much as you can, to find the intersections between as many different topics as possible. And so that's what I was doing with my academic career. And I found that that's what I really wanted to do with my writing. So my blog is very heavily family focused. And actually, if you go in there and you go to the archives, you can find the very first post I put up in 2003. And you can see how it's evolved topic-wise. It's always been about whatever I'm interested in. And a few years ago, it became very heavily about parenting because that was my life. And that was very much what I was interested in. And that's still true. But I want to be able to talk about the parenting issues that maybe not everyone is talking about, or the parenting issues that I'm seeing and how I'm facing them that deal with my son's feeling of self-worth around athletics. Or I write a lot about my daughter and her growing up with a bit of a disability, special need. She was born with a complete bilateral cleft lip and palate, which has required surgeries, and she has scarring on her face that's very visible. And so talking about that, sort of that kind of stuff. But really what I want to be able to do is take topics that you as a reader may feel you're not interested in. Some people, I don't like sports. Well, I want to be able to write about sports and connect them to something that you're interested in so that you start seeing that overlap. Or take something that you're interested in and then bring in another piece to it that maybe seems like it's from an unrelated field. And that's my life. I write about some of the cool experiences I have on my own in terms of like I'm a rugby referee, and that's led to some cool things that I never expected. And just bringing in lots of different topics and lots of different ideas for people to sort of mull over and sit with.
It's really, I appreciate you sharing that piece because, we get this mistaken impression that like life is like a resume, right? Where one step then leads to the next step and everything is predictable, and that you should follow a line and somehow the line is going to make sense. And it's anything but the truth. And the thing is like, I'm like, if I, my go-to is to be a rule follower. I'm like, what's the rule I'm supposed to follow in this? And I have to be really intentional about making sure that that's not the thing that runs the show, because it blinds me to different opportunities that show up that completely don't make sense, but could have these amazingly wonderful side benefits that nobody could have predicted. I sat down with somebody not a week or 10 days ago, and they said, I love the work you're doing. I want to do work just like you. I want to know, how did you do this? What's that path? And I'm like, there is no path. Like, there's no path. There's no path to getting to what you want to do other than doing it and finding a way.
So, I had an opportunity once to learn about, so I come through a lot of this by having been a sign language interpreter. And I once interpreted, it was like a 2-week training on aeronautical cartography. And they talked a lot about instrument flight rules and like the beacons, how you move, from beacon to beacon when you're flying a plane, like a commercial jet. And so I think about that. So there's no path, right?
Yeah.
But there's beacons.
Yeah.
And part of the beaconing for getting the life that you want, I think, is being willing to say yes to a lot of stuff. People offer me things. I say yes too much, I think, and I get a little bit too much on my plate sometimes. But when opportunities come up, I love to say yes, because that's what leads to the next thing, that leads to the next thing, that leads to the really cool thing. And so you get so much more out of your life if you're just willing to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you end up in places you never expected, and getting invitations and getting known for stuff that you had no idea you were going to get known for. And you get to meet amazing people. And there's an entire movement around making a commitment for like taking on a year where you say yes to everything. Every invitation you get, you just say yes to, even and especially if you don't think that that's a good idea. Like, just say yes to everything.
Just say yes.
Just say yes. And just keep moving forward. Like, you want to have lunch? Sure. Yes. Do you want, are you open to, taking a position on a board for a nonprofit? Yes. Would you be willing to do this? Sure. Why not? Yes, let's do that.
And then you talk about resume building, and that becomes an accidental way of doing that, where you're like, I have been on boards of nonprofits on accident that I probably had no business being on initially, but I figured it out, and now it's there. So yeah, like, that's exactly, you want to just be able to do things. Just go do things, and do things with your kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Drag them along. They will end up taking away stuff that you had no idea about. I love when they go, the movement in the early 90s was quality time, which kind of felt like dress your children up and take them for a walk in the park that you never go to. We're going to spend 15 minutes and you're going to get out of the car and you're going to appreciate the quality time we're going to have together. And at the same extent, they were trying to they were trying to be the opposite of quantity time, which is just, I'm with my kids all the time, but being present and being willing to run into stuff that's super uncomfortable. And I love having this conversation with my kids. Is like, they're like, we're trying to plan a family reunion right now, and we're not actually sure if we're going to be able to pull it off, because some people may not be gelling. It's not really clear. My kids are like, well, how's it going to go? Are we going to have it? And I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of uncomfortable right now. Like, some people say they can make it. Some people say they can't. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. And this is that uncomfortable space that you just have to sit through until things become clear. And it's so easy to get caught up in I don't know how that's going to go, so I'm not going to do anything. And I'm not going to do anything if I don't know exactly how it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like your story is one where you've been like, it's, that I've always heard it attributed to JFK, which is he tells a story of two school kids walking home from school around a property that they have to go around to get to their house. And it's got a 10-foot wall, and they can't get over it, and they can't go around it. And it makes them walk all the way around this entire property to get to their home. And one day, one of the little boys gets super frustrated, and he just stops next to the wall, and he takes off his hat and he throws it over the wall. And the other kid said, "What do you do that for?" And he goes, "Well, now we have to go over the wall because I have to go get my hat." Right? And that until you're committed to something, until you're willing to take the leap, there's forever going to be hesitation. And the more you keep hesitating and looking at the hesitation, the more you're going to hesitate. Is it Mel Gibbons? No, it's Mel. I'm going to put it up in the comments. There's a writer, last name escaping me. Maybe a commenter will know what it is. She's writing a book called The 5-Second Rule. And she wrote it from her personal experience, but she's also been able to back it up with science about we have ideas that show up in our heads. We have about 5 seconds to take action on that idea, to turn it into concrete action, or it's going to slip away from us. And then all we're going to be left with is doubt and fear about what that would impart on us. So that we got that 5-second window, it's like, oh, I should go in and enroll in some yoga classes as you're driving by a yoga studio. If you don't take action, which looks like pull the car over, find a parking spot, go inside, the likelihood of you doing that is about 0. So you get about that 5-second window, which has been really super powerful for me recently. Just been like, oh, opportunity, that sounds good. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, I think for certain opportunities that's true. I think there's definitely things that there's good times to be deliberate, right? Tattoos, for example. I've always felt like if I think about a tattoo, if I still want it 2 years later, then it's probably a fine idea. There's some things you don't necessarily want to do spur of the moment. Getting married. I think getting married is another good one. Take your time with that. But there are other big decisions. So in my writing, I'm not like a parenting advice kind of guy. I kind of feel like we all know about as much about parenting as each other. And I loved there was some Onion article that was like, studies show that every method of parenting produces equally messed up kids. So I don't get hung up a lot on advice. I will talk to people when they ask questions and I'll give my opinions. But my point is that the only piece of parenting advice that I have for people is usually when they're wondering if they should have kids. And I've seen, friends and acquaintances who want to make sure they have the right job and the right house and a certain amount of money saved. And they need to have all of these things in a line before they have kids. And on some level, I understand that. The main, most important thing that I've seen that's a determiner of your parenting success is, do you want to have kids? And if you want to have kids, you know that you want to be a parent and you're ready for that commitment, go for it. You don't need to have a certain amount of money. You don't need to have a certain job. Your kids don't need anything but your love and attention. That's it.
Wait, can you say that again?
Your kids don't need anything but your love and attention.
Yes.
That's all they need.
Yes. They need your time. They need your presence.
Right. There are people who have no money who have wonderful childhoods and wonderful parents. There are people who have tons of money who have terrible childhoods and terrible parents. It's not about how much money you have. It's not about your career. It's not about any of that. It's about, are you ready? Are you ready to do it? Do it. You don't need to really think about much else because you'll figure it out, right? Like we've been figuring out how to be parents as a species for thousands of years. You will also figure it out. As long as you love your kids and you're excited about being their parent, that's all you need. And if you're not sure whether you should have kids, like if you feel like, I don't know if I want to have kids, don't. Don't. It's not like a halfway in, like, oh, try it. Like, you got to be sure. But if you're sure, that's all you need. All you need is to be sure.
Yeah. And you're going to do great, right?
Absolutely.
Half the game is just being willing to go all in. It's just go all in. And, that you and I had this really great conversation that we're hoping to follow up on when we get into Dad 2.0 is about this intentionally designing your fatherhood, right? Mm-hmm. Like who you want to be as a dad. Because for you, it was, a lot of people have the dad they had, and there were some things that their dad gave them as a dad that they go, oh, this is definitely something I want to take on and give on to my kids. Mm-hmm. And then there may be some stuff that I'd like to leave behind and maybe not give on to my kids. And so that's certainly true for me, but it's for you, it's kind of a blank slate, like a tabula rasa. You get a blank slate where you got to make it up.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, that's the benefit of having a dad who wasn't around. Like
unexpected benefit.
Absolutely.
You can look at it, and there's lots of different ways to look at it, but that's one.
But that did become that template, right? Where, you say there's things you want to pass on and things you don't. I knew that the biggest thing I wanted to do for my kids was just to be there. Now, like my first action was just going to be committed to showing up.
Yeah.
No matter what happens. And my wife and I have a wonderful relationship, and I do think that we will be together until we die. But, like all marriages, I think all relationships, there's moments, especially early on or in that middle time or whatever, like, things aren't always perfect and rosy all the time. But I knew when my son was born that no matter what happened, I was always going to be there as a father. I guess it's tough. I don't want to sound like unromantic, but I just, we know that things happen. People don't always stay together. And so I knew I'd always be there for my kids. And I'll clarify one more time, so my wife is watching this. We'll always be together, honey. It's going to be fine. That's the plan. But just thinking about my mindset going into fatherhood was just to always show up, was to always be there no matter what. And there have been times when I've really kicked myself when, even though I've known it's sort of short term, I've had to be more career focused, or I've had to be focused on something outside. Or just to keep my sanity, I've had to be focused on something outside my house. And yet I think that my kids do know that I'm there, and we have a very close relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that, you're talking about the challenges of marriage, and that lives so true for me as well. Right. Like there've just been times where you're going, I remember just in completely uncharted waters where we were going sideways, at one point in our relationship or another, where I'm like, I know how my father would go with this, but that's not where I want to go. And I have to figure out how to move forward in that. And there are times when it seems like it almost hopeless, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how this is going to work out. It's awful right now. But the backside of it for me, for being willing to be vulnerable and being willing to stand in the face of, I don't know, and hurt and pain, and, having to recreate my experience of relationship with my wife, is a dramatic intimacy. And I have a connection to my kids that is, it's almost I don't even know how to put words to it. I just am so grateful to the level of connection that I have with them.
And I think that circles back around to what we do as writers and influencers and people who are in this space, and why it's so important to have groups of fathers and groups of husbands and groups of men who are working together to share those stories, because I don't think we do anyone any favors if we perpetuate this idea that everything has to be happy and rosy and perfect all the time to have a good relationship. So if we don't acknowledge that relationships have problems, and there's times when you're going to fight, and there's times when you're going to be angry, and it's not about never having conflict. It's about how do you then come through to the other side with a relationship that's not only intact, but hopefully stronger, because you've used that to build a greater trust or to build a greater understanding. That the commitment to a relationship and the commitment to a marriage isn't just this, well, we're staying together for the kids, or it's not just, I'm stuck in this marriage. It's, I'm committed to this marriage. I'm committed to acknowledging that we have whatever problem we have, and then working through it so that we get to the other side. And I think we, being a member of a group of dad bloggers, going to things like Dad 2.0, you have guys who are very open and very willing to talk about the fact that we have struggles as fathers, we have struggles as parents, we also have struggles as husbands and in our relationships, and that acknowledging those struggles is a big part of removing the veneer that if you're not just happy and dancing all the time, you should just leave, right? And now, of course, I also would acknowledge that there are relationships that are broken and can't be saved. I'm not sort of piling on anyone who may have made that choice. But in terms of helping people who might be going through some issues with their marriage, I think it helps for all of us to say, like, yeah, like, you're going to have issues in your marriage. It's what do you do next?
Yeah. And part of getting to the what are we going to do next, in my experience, is about being willing to share the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're struggling alone. When you get into that struggling alone place, it becomes like this all or nothing challenge, right? Like, I'm either all in or, forget it, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. And that's a super toxic place to play. And when all you can hear is the same voice in your head, which is, not moving, especially if it's not moving anything forward or shining new light on anything. And there's this opportunity when we have this willingness to sort of share what's so for us with another person, whether that's somebody in the clergy or a therapist or a coach or a men's group or a sibling or somebody who is an unconnected, sympathetic, has no agenda whatsoever ear to just go like, it's just awful right now. And just sometimes it's just having someone say, I'm sorry, it's so hard.
Absolutely. And of course, that brings us back to the community where, and this is what I've seen a lot from the other people in the dad space, is when someone comes to the group or writes about having a struggle in their relationship, almost universally, the message is, hey, man, you can do this. We're here to support you. You guys can work this out. Here's some things that worked for me. Here's some things that I've seen. There's none of what I've seen in past relationships of my own and those of my friends where the friend group or the support network is like, that's right, you should be completely mad. You should be more mad. And forget this guy. And, they feed into the conflict because they think that's what being supportive is. Right. Like, I'm going to support you by helping to justify what you're feeling, which I can see the intent behind that. Doesn't always help. And most of the weddings I've gone to, they ask for the community to pledge to support the couple. And for me, that pledging to support the couple is always a lot more about pledging to figure out how to mend and repair their relationship when it sort of goes awry, rather than thinking that support is really just feeding into whatever the negativity is.
Yeah.
Which is tough too, because you say men's groups, and that phrase I think has slid into this, like, it's gotten a bad rap, right? Like, it starts getting associated with like men's rights groups instead of just like groups of men who want to support each other, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think when people
hear we're off in the forest banging a drum somewhere,
right? I think that's the idea of men's groups. You're like, oh, men's groups, like, what do you guys do? Like, you drink Schlitz and shoot crossbows at deer or something, and talk about how terrible women are, which of course isn't the case. Just like women's groups aren't, whatever people feared about feminism in the 50s. Like, it's just, you need to be around people.
Yeah. Right. Like there's, the number of men that I run into, like, I have gotten to a place where I really crave finding sort of elders, right? Like wise elders, men who are a decade ahead of me, who, especially dads, right? Like, where are you now? Like, what's your relationship like? This is where I'm at. I'm totally torn about this issue, but there's this richness about spending time with the other men who are in the same boat with you, who you're like, oh, I get you. I'm totally get that struggle with your fill in the blank, but also being exposed to, wise elders who were like, oh yeah, here's how that transformed for me, to get sort of a picture of what it might look like in the future, which can be reassuring. The other thing, though, is being willing to contribute to people who are early on the path, right? Like those dads who are struggling with newborns and maybe postpartum depression, or the transition into we were two, and we were two single people who were doing really well, and now we're three, and we have no idea what we're doing, and everything feels broken.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to come down and sit down with them and like share your story, like I totally remember what that was like.
Yep.
And you too will make it through this.
Yeah, and that was a big part of us deciding to come back to Berkeley from DC, although we were starting after whatever 6 or 7 years to have more of a network, is having some more of that like hands-on support. You know, we've generally lived, you know, both my parents passed away. My wife's parents have always lived sort of far away from us. And so it's been really an interesting thing for us raising kids, we feel like on our own, like without having that family around. And at least being back here, we have some friends who could potentially help out, although we've also found that we're weird about asking for help. So we haven't done ourselves any favors there. But the idea that we could have some more real local support was a big part of our decision to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, that's something that I've been actively working on, even in these last 6 months, is about creating more networks of relationships outside of the ones that I've been leaning on, you know, because where I live, I'm thousands of miles away from family. And so there's family, there's the family that I choose around me from our peers. And, you know, and I realized that it was kind of a small group, and that because we were all getting so busy, right, we were all getting so busy that we were connecting less because our kids were getting a little older and there were more activities. And so all of a sudden it was like, oh, maybe there's a way to expand our group of close friends to start bringing more people into the fold. Totally great. Roberto, this has been awesome. And we could do this for the rest of the day as far as I'm concerned. And yet you probably have things to do, and as do our folks who are watching. So how do people follow you? Where should they go to learn more about the great Roberto Santiago?
So, as I mentioned, I'm sort of bad at branding, and I went into all of this fairly haphazardly. And so my social channels are a little bit rough. So you can find me at interdisciplinarylife.com. You can find me on Facebook if you search an Interdisciplinary Life. You can find me on Twitter, but that one is at Berto, Berto, in public. And then I'm in Interdisciplinary Life on Instagram. So you can follow all of our wonderful exploits that way. Last semester, I was teaching full-time, and I didn't write anything since last summer until just today, when I did a post about taking my kids to a parkour class, which was really interesting and made me hurt in all sorts of places. I'd forgotten I'd had muscles. And I'm hoping to be back into some more writing now that I'm transitioning out of teaching full-time.
Oh, that's pretty great. So Roberto, here at Heroic Fatherhood, we're all about making winning days by rhythms and structures that we create for our days. So if there was going to be, what's one thing you do that helps you have a great day? What's one thing you do first thing in the morning that helps you set you up for a great day?
Wow, that's a great question. I bet everyone talks about coffee, because coffee is really important for me. Oh man, what sets me up for a great day? It really is. It's like, I like that first cup of coffee, being able to sit. So, and especially like in the winter when it is chilly, even here. And this is something I've been doing. So I actually live in the house I grew up in. My kids are all in my old room, and I cook in the kitchen my mom used to cook me meals in. But so here's what I do when I get the coffee is I like to go over and I sit over the heat vent, right? So we have this, vents in the floor that blow the heat up. And whenever possible, I like to put a blanket on my lap over the heat vent so that the heat just stays in the blanket. And I read the news and I drink my coffee and I sit over the heat vent. And that's a really big part of the morning for me in the winters.
Like an amazing morning.
So heat vent. And my son now has been competing with me. The heat vent's under the kitchen table in the kitchen, and I'll wake up in the morning and he'll already be sitting on it. Like just sitting. He does it so that he pulls his shirt out so that the heat blows up the back of his shirt. So a little competition there, but it works out.
Oh, that's so great. So thank you guys. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, this has been Charlie with Heroic Fatherhood, and another of the series, Dad's Making a Difference, with Roberto Santiago of An Interdisciplinary Life. Go check him out. Follow him. Don't be surprised if you see another video of he and I when we're at Dad 2.0 in something like 2 weeks.
Oh, my God.
Coming up soon. And thank you guys so much for coming. Roberto, thank you so much for sharing so much of your great time today, and so much to chew on. And we hope you guys all have a great day.
Thanks for having me, man. This was a joy. Take care.